Welcome to the stage, Mr. Andy Harrington.
Hey there, if you are watching this video, in this video I am going to explain to you something very important that you should be definitely having as an asset inside your business. If you are a coach, consultant, trainer, mentor, actually anyone in business, the one thing that's going to assist you in selling more is case studies. There is nothing more powerful than a case study story of a client that you have helped. But the question is, how do you organize a case study story? And how do you do it in a way that sounds natural and, more importantly, helps you do one very important thing that most people miss, and that is pre-handle objections. Case studies are fantastic for pre-handling objections that otherwise might make your audience or your target market or client think, well, it wouldn't work for me because. So let's study a case study, and in this video I'll lay out the exact tactics that you can follow so that you can look at your past clients and choose the best ones to build some case studies. Now, where would you put these case studies first? Well, you'd probably put them in a webinar that you put together. That could be an automated webinar. It could actually be a webinar that you deliver live. Where else could you deliver this kind of a talk? Well, you could do it on stage. It could be part of a business presentation. It could be a short presentation. It could be part of a longer workshop. But ultimately, these case studies are your assets that you want to be putting out as much as possible. So where else could you use them? Your website. That's another good place you could use these case studies. Anyway, let's get into what these acts are that make up these case studies. Now, I've just mentioned there to you acts because there are three major acts that make up a case study story. So if you haven't done so already, you definitely want to be making notes right now, because I'm going to give you the gold that's going to help you to formulate these case study stories, which will bring more sales and more inquiries coming your way. All right, case study number one. Act is you want to be building Act 1 around something called your client's problem. So whenever a client wants to come out and be helped by you, it's normally because they have a problem they wish to solve. Now, here's the important thing. The problem that your client has that you're going to introduce into Act 1 needs to represent, well, number one, a problem that you're an expert in solving, but also a problem that the target market that you want to reach also needs and wants solving. Then there is an identity, there's an association. So in Act 1, not only are you going to be positioning this problem and introducing this problem into the story, you also need to do two other things. You need to set the scene, and you also need to build the character. Let's talk through those now. Setting the scene. Never make the mistake of forgetting that the audience weren't there. Now, what do I mean by that? When you recount a story, in your head, you have a memory of that story. You're holding the memory of it in your mind. So you've got a picture of it, but your audience doesn't have that picture. So if all you do is describe kind of what happened, but they haven't got an environment in which to hold that data in. They don't have a bucket to hold it in. So you've got to describe the scene. So that means, where are you in time and space? Dates are important. Build the scene. I use a technique called save the scene, S-A-V-E. That stands for smells, auditory, visual, and emotions. Now, you have to describe all of those, but using all of those will give the audience a richer experience because you want them to make them feel as if they're there. So doing so would enable your audience not only to feel like they're there, but also to feel like they're engaged in the story too. Now, second thing you've got to do is build the character. Now, the main character in the story is going to be your case study client. And here's what's important. Your audience has to fall in love. That's probably a bit of a strong word, but they have to fall in love. They have to like the character. Because if they don't, they won't care about them. So we want to reveal something about them that's a feature of them that makes them go, yeah, actually, they're a pretty nice person. So we've got to say some qualities that might represent that. So let me give you an example. I first met John Moakler in the late part of 2020. And he impressed me immediately because he was really well dressed, which is particularly impressive since it was 6 a.m. in the morning in Canadian time. But not only was he was a professional person, you could see he was a consummate professional, he was also a very caring individual. You could tell by the tone of his voice that he had a really caring nature to him. And I really warmed to him immediately. Right? So now I've described John Moakler, does that make sense? And now you're falling in love a little bit with the character because I've described a quality about him that you might like. Now that's important because we don't want the audience thinking that they don't want to go on the journey with this client, okay? Very important. Now, I didn't describe the background there, but if I was going to describe the background, I would describe his office space. So I'd say, and as I looked to him through the Zoom meeting, I could see he was sitting at a very old wooden desk. And he had pictures around the walls, but also the awards that he's won. So I could see he was every ounce this professional that he was showing himself to be. Make sense? Now you've got a picture in your mind and you know who John Moakler is. And then we introduce the problem. So then we'd say, okay, but he had a problem. The problem John had was that he is a financial advisor and he was getting business by doing dinner evening events locally in his local town, his city in Canada. Now, the thing about that is, once the coronavirus hit, he couldn't run it anymore. He could no longer do dinner events, invite his target market, which was doctors, dentists, and business owners. He couldn't invite them in the company because it wasn't allowed. And literally, the sales dried up. And that's why he made the call. So now what we've done is we've introduced a problem. It's also the same problem my audience would typically have is, well, you know, how am I going to get clients? They've associated John in the first place. They kind of like him. They've got a picture in his mind, and that's Act 1. How long did it take? 2 minutes? Maybe that's all it really takes. Now, and that's what you want for a case study. You don't want it being too long. When you're doing like a personal story, it can be longer when you're positioning yourself. But in a case study story, we don't want to make it laborsome. We don't want to get two bells and whistles. We want to get to the meat because what really needs to happen is we want to see this transformation that he's going to go through, which leads us on to Act number 2. Now, Act 2 is where there is a journey. So Act 2 is called the journey. Now, this is normally the biggest part of the story. Now, here's what's important here. The journey is the journey that the client's going to go on. And this is the first time you appear because in the story, this is where you really show up. This is where you showcase your talent, you showcase your ability. This is where you showcase your process that you take a client through. And the big mistake I see here is my clients not doing that. They kind of say, yeah, we worked together for a few months and then they kind of go to the result. No, we want to showcase the process. We want to talk about what you did because then what happens is your audience gets to hear what you do for people, but inside the context of a story, as opposed to context of a pitch. They hear it inside the safety of a story. Does that make sense? Because now their unconscious mind is captivated. They hear what you did with, in this case, John, in my case. They hear about that, and they go like, wow, he sounds like me, and wow, what he went through sounds like amazing. I'd love to be able to do something like that. And it starts to build that desire in the minds of the client to want to be like John. Does that make sense? So in this part of the journey, there needs to be a little bit of resistance, right? Because no solution ever happens instantaneously, right? We don't want to be disingenuous to the story. There needs to be a little bit of a struggle. And what we want really are some aha moments, at least one, where the penny drops and the client goes, I get it. And it's like they cross a threshold of a barrier that then means that they're moving on. So you've got to build that into the story too. So in John's case, for example, John Moakler, the character I'm talking about in this story, we would move into Act 2 by saying, so we started working together. And initially John was quite, I would say, a little bit skeptical and reticent to begin implementing because like anybody, you kind of stick with what you know. And I guess most of the time I would say John was kind of thinking the coronavirus would go away, he could go back to doing the dinner shows again. But that quickly became apparent that wasn't going to be the case. And so what we did is we began working on John's automated webinar. I explained to him that he'd get the same results he was getting with the dinner events live with an automated live webinar that essentially was going to run every 15 minutes. record it once, and they could use it forever. And initially, I think it was kind of like, seems too good to be true almost. It's like almost like, well, actually, why didn't I think of this before? But there's something about execution here, because John was a brilliant implementer. Now, I gave him my structure. I have 225 slides in the structure. I've 80% done his webinar for him, psychologically done. But let me tell you, the 20% that my clients have to do, that's way more important almost than my 80%. Because in essence, that's the bit where they customize, add their story in, add their case study stories in, and add their unique process into that webinar structure that I've already designed. And we worked on it for several weeks. And the penny really dropped for him when we put his first case study story in. And we put it in exactly in the right place in the structure. And like you could almost hear in his voice that he knew it was going to work, because it was just so seamlessly where it went. So we recorded it, and then we started working. After recording it, we had 2 Zoom calls a week where he joined me and a few other people in my program. And I shared one very powerful concept with him, which is how to create a metaphorical story. And I taught him how to create a metaphor. He then used it on a client the following week, somebody he hadn't been able to close for a deal in over a year. And he closed 280,000 Canadian dollars worth of business right there and then. So how powerful are stories? Incredible. Here's something to now remember. That content tells, but stories sell. So are you using powerful stories? The most powerful story of all are case study stories in business, because they are the evidence. So now we've got Act 1 and now we've got Act 2. Act 2 is showcasing how you got the result by working on your process. Don't go over this too fast. Really show them what you do by laying out what we call in my business a unique branded solution. It's your chance to show your unique branded approach. In essence, your framework, your recipe for getting results with clients, that's what you showcase there in Act 2. And the audience won't even see it. They won't even realize you're effectively selling to them. They won't even hear or know that because they're captivated by John's story. Does that make sense? All right, that leads on to Act 3. So Act 3 is where ultimately it's about transformation. It's actually about results. So it's now about talking about the ongoing results that your client is getting. Does that make sense? So that's your chance to really show the outcomes that your work produces. So what you want to do then is start edging out. Now, the best way to do that would be to think about 3 results, because most people are convinced by the rule of 3. So what it means is small win, medium win, biggest win. So when you're relating to your client, you would say, so first he got 280,000 of business. Then he started getting consistently over 30 quality leads every single week from his webinar. And now he's able to make millions. And here's the best part of all, that now what he's doing is he's not just working locally in his city. Now he's expanding across the entire breadth of Canada, and now the business is changing completely. Sometimes a setback can be a step forward in your business if you ask the right questions. If you ask the right questions, what's the opportunity here? How can I use it? You might find there's an opportunity for you in any kind of fallback or setback in your life or your business. So Act 3 is about showing the results. And finally, about positioning yourself. So as you get results for your client in Act 3, you can also then go, and that's what I love. You know, finding people like John to work with is what I live for, because that's what brings me to life. That's what makes me excited to see that transformation. So it's also a chance to position yourself as well. Does that make sense? So let's just recap on what we said so far. There are 3 acts in a case study story. Act 1 is called the problem. We want to establish a problem that your audience identifies with and something they resonate with. It's something they're probably wrestling with themselves. Otherwise, you can tell a story, could be a good story, but at the end they'll just say, hey, sounds like a good story, but what's it got to do with me? So we want them to identify with a problem. By the way, this also means that if you're going to have, say, 2 or 3 case studies in a presentation, let's say in a webinar or an on-stage presentation, then make sure they cover different problems that you solve or different angles on problems. And also they represent different styles or types of people that you work with. So I work with coaches, consultants, trainers. So I'd have 1 coach, 1 consultant, 1 trainer. Does that make sense? In John's case, he works with doctors, dentists, and business owners. So he'd have a case study for a doctor, 1 for a dentist, 1 for a business owner. Does that make sense? And he would cover different things or different problems. But what it also you need to do, which we'll come back to in a second, is handling different objections too. So Act 1 is about the problem, establish the client, build them out as a character and the environment. Act 2 is about the work you did together, showcasing your unique approach. Act 3 is about the results they get. So one final thing, if we can build it in, is to build in some kind of objection handler. In our story, if you remember, there was a tiny piece where I referred to John being skeptical in the beginning. Do you remember? And that he wanted to hold on to the old way of doing things. So in essence, by pacing that objection in the story, it in essence means I've acknowledged that, but also John's actions outweigh that in the end, which means that that objection is almost inoculated against because there's already evidence that having that objection isn't true, valid, or useful. Does that make sense? But don't overstate it. Be careful. Don't go too far with that objection. Don't make too much of it. Never underestimate people's ability to read that little part of the story and for it to sow a little seed in their mind. So this is how you do case study stories. You're probably sitting on a gold mine right now of case study stories that you could utilize inside your business. There is something we haven't discussed though, and that's presentation skills. Your ability to deliver, not just design, but also to deliver a world-class story too. And that takes some time to learn, but could it be learned? Yes. Is it worth it? I'd say probably. Because think about it. How many times in your life have you already presented? How many times in your life will you present in the future? And is it worth learning a skill that positions you above other people? And the time to learn it is before you need it. Because the time when you're going to need it and you don't have the skill is the time you're going to experience the pain of loss, missing out, or just not feeling good about yourself that you didn't do the best that you could do. Now, if you're interested, and I hope you are, if you've listened this far, I suspect you probably are, then there's probably a button somewhere around here that you can press that will take you through to an opportunity. Because I'd like to invite you to join me for one of my virtual live events where I'm going to share with you how not only do case study stories in depth like this, but also how to perform like a professional, but also how to create your own process if you don't have one or you haven't formulated that yet, your own unique branded solution inside your business. But in essence, how to build a presentation that you can use in either a webinar or a live presentation that you could use that can help you to get more business. Because look, it doesn't matter how much technology changes and improves. It doesn't matter how much we have social media or other platforms. The one thing you need on any single platform is quality content, great presentation. That is what you need. And if you don't have that skill, it doesn't matter how technically adapted you are, the content's going to be a bit dry and wooden. So old school wins here. Presentations are still the most powerful thing that you can use inside your business. And if we go a bit more narrow inside those presentations, we'll find that storytelling and presentation skills is what's going to hold that presentation together. So if it sounds good to you, I've got a very special offer for you. Click the button below and you can read and you can also listen a bit more about it. I'll see you soon. Thank you.